Welcome Mahesh and Tarun. They say content is king, and obviously I am amongst kings. Today I don't know what I am doing here, because I certainly am no king. And possibly, the title is not wrong, because I remember a time when there are 25 million TV homes in India, and now we have 150 million TV homes, and I guess everybody buys a TV to watch what you guys put together. So you must be kings. Also, we boast of a not very nice statistic, but I think it's nice for you all that India has more television sets than toilets. Because television seems to provide more interesting fare than toilets. So obviously all that is very good, and you guys are obviously doing something right. Having given you these bouquets, let me also say that from where I see it, we seem to have entered a sort of a very stable viewership environment. I mean, you guys do lots and lots of things, but there is very little sort of that actually changes in the marketplace. So, as markets get very, very stable and get very mature, there are sort of attempts by different people, and you're going to hear about one right now, to sort of disrupt the market, to do something different, to get a spike in it. But ultimately, if I take a slightly long-term macro view at how shares of different genres have behaved, I see there is, in reality, at a macro level, very little change. Perhaps the only change that has happened is that the biggest genre, GEC, has marginally gone up over 7-8 years. And there are some other marginal drops, like regional seems to have marginally come down. So, to discuss this and to see how we can sort of disrupt the market a little more, how we can make the market a little more volatile, what is it that one must do right to bring about this change? So let's hear two very eminent gentlemen who have in their own ways attempted this. So Mahesh, may I request you to please kick off by giving us some insights into how did Epic come about, what was your thinking, what is the end game, and how do you see it unravel?
That's a very long question. We'll be here all morning, but thank you, and thank you to Anil and Indian Television for setting up a content hub. I think it's really a good time to talk about content in the context of television. Sam, you mentioned the fact that there hasn't been much change in the broad macro trends of GECs, gaining marginally at best, and the other segments being more or less the same. A couple of things regarding that it is only in the last 2 or 3 years we've actually seen some impact of digitization of television. The digitization of television to me is a really important thing, and I can use the analogy of films. If all of us, some of us who were there remember the films of the 1980s, and you'll see there was a lot of homogeneity in the kind of films that were being made, because they were made for single screens. The minute multiplexes came, you started seeing a whole huge variety of content, and today you can see far more variety in content of films than you can see in content of television. And really speaking, it's the multiplexes that led to that, because you have now an economic model that allows you to make money with a smaller film, which in the 80s it did not. I think similarly, digitization is going to do that with television. As choices increase, as consumers start having 800-900 channels, and as fragmentation increases, as consumers have a basket of channels that they're looking at, no longer one channel, the role of content becomes increasingly important to be part of that basket. And not just the role of content, it's also the role of what the channel stands for. So is the channel a brand? Does it stand for something which is easy to understand? And in that context, I feel that was the genesis of Epic. Because history and mythology is in our DNA. You know, all the research that we've done, and I'm sure all of you would agree, that India has a very special relationship with its history and mythology. And so setting up a channel which has great stories, both fiction and non-fiction in the space, is a natural consequence of that. So that's a summary of what got us thinking, the macro trends that are happening, and what specifically to do with history and mythology.
So tell me, before we go on to Tarun, one of the things that strikes me, based on what you said a little while earlier, is that every GC also has a fair amount of history and mythology. And I'm told today people are watching shows and not channels. So does that kind of put
that's a great conversation. So if you go back to the 1970s, GEC meant news, youth, a kids block, sports, plus some fiction programming. Why did these segments come about? Because obviously these segments have an interest within the target group. Similarly, as you start going forward, you're going to, if you look at internationally, and let's take the US as an example, the number of channels that have come in the last 25 years are all segmented to certain genres. So, as there's a proliferation of television, you're starting to see that. And the reason in India today they see more shows than channels is because the channels are general entertainment channels. So, it is driven by shows. It's not driven by the positioning of the channel, because the channels are positioned in a broader sense.
So Tarun, let's go over to you. I mean, what's your experience with segmentation? And also let's talk a little bit about its financial viability in the Indian context.
Okay, so first you are among kings, but you are the kingmaker. So let's settle that first. We've got a good set of audience, and Anil's actually put together a good morning. So thank you so much, Anil. And I can see a lot of familiar faces, people who I've worked with for many years, who are itching to talk about content. So we'll give them an opportunity towards the end of the session, more than just making it one way. I think what Mahesh said is right. People are watching more and more shows, and GCs are starting to get polarized and fragmented into specific shows, specific day parts, specific blocks, rather than being watched as one channel as a whole. And I think the rule of three is a key thing that we need to start thinking about. So in any category, and Sam, you work across many categories, the rule of three applies, right? So the first three guys can do general stuff. They can be a general soap, they can be a general toothpaste, and Colgate in the rule of three is a general toothpaste. It doesn't need to be Sensodyne, which is a specialized toothpaste, right? So the top three guys can do a lot of rule of three, and so in media and so in GCs. But the guys beyond the third have to start thinking differently to be able to make a mark or to be able to survive in the game. I think India has done that fairly successfully on the GEC side. And maybe I will exceed the brief by saying that truly there are only 3 GCs in India. There aren't more than that. And I think that goes between surplus, colors, and Z. Beyond that, really, there are all specialist channels. So whether you look at Sony, which is largely a male crime, action-driven channel, and 70 to 80% of Sony's viewership comes from 2 or 3 big shows around that genre. And similarly, the case for Life OK, so it's between Savdan and Shapat and 1 or 2 of shows like that. Or some which is anyway fairly fairly well segmented, or whether it's Magic, which is also fairly well segmented in that space. And I think that has allowed people to thrive, that has allowed people to make a business of what they do, that has allowed people to pick their audience sets, their geographies, and make a viable business out of it. I think if they were all trying to be generalists, they would be very hard up today. 6 generalists wouldn't have survived in this space. And this is not the case only with India. I think if you go back and look at some mature markets like the US, right, and if you look at the segmentation even between the 5 large terrestrial networks, or 6 large terrestrial networks in the US, which is Fox, CW, ABC, NBC, CBS, they've all taken their clear position. So CBS is largely between comedy and crime, and their large big shows are CSI and NCIS and stuff like that, and ABC is around drama and things like Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder, and some amount of family comedies at the middle. And if you look at Fox, it's largely about youth entertainment. So American Idol is their biggest show. So I don't think it's only about India, or it's about emerging markets, or it's about mature markets. I think in all TV markets, at some point in time, the rule of 3 does apply, and eventually people tend to look at segmentation and look at areas where they can make more for themselves. We launched, we took a national footprint around May. We were UP, MP, Bihar channel, and we decided to go national when digitization happened. And as Mahesh said, the democratization of content really has happened after digitization's happened, and people are free to actually pick and choose with a good LCN number, rather than being in an analog world where you had to be placed well in the first 30 channels to be even, have any sort of basic viewership. And I think, from May to now, we've seen, a very robust growth in viewership, primarily because we were fairly segmented. And I think, that with some amount of distribution and geography segmentation that we did, led us to thrive in marketplace. Otherwise, I don't think as a pure generalist, we would have actually made any impact. I hope I was able to answer that question.
Let's touch on another subject which sort of, to me from the outside, is of some concern, which is the financial viability of sort of highly segmented channels in a setup like India, where the majority revenue comes from advertising. I believe, I'm not so sure, but I'm told that in most other parts of the world, there is an equal distribution of revenue between subscription and advertising. And therefore, this kind of highly segmented approach still makes a financially viable model because, if you don't get money from advertising because you don't have substantial viewership, there are a certain small set of viewers who are willing to pay you a lot of money to watch good content. Now, that seems to be a little bit in the distance in India. So, what is the...
I agree with you completely. I don't think, and I fundamentally believe that personally, and very passionately. And I was saying this to Mahesh right at the start of the session. I don't think there is space for niche segmented stuff in India. When you do it in Hindi, and you have to pay prices of creating content which is, if not equal, comparable to what the GECs are doing, and you have a certain amount of distribution cost to get out there, there is no room to play a segmented marketplace. Just to give you an international equivalent, internationally, channels which are equal subscriber revenue and equal advertising revenue are largely in the pay-per-view, DTH, subscriber-led space. But the large GCs are free-to-air terrestrial. So whether you take Germany, whether you take UK, whether you take US, all channels which are large GCs are terrestrial free-to-air. So they don't play in that space at all. When you start to create original content, which is expensive, which needs to fill up a schedule of minimum 3 hours a day, you have an economics to play to, and those economics don't allow you until you get to, and I know you're not allowed to use the GRP terms in India anymore, but until you get to 50, 60 GRPs, there is no game, and you would accept that. And to get that, you have to play the lowest common or the middle of the road lowest common denominator game. So I agree with you. I don't think that, you know, in the Hindi space, when you start to pay for original content, can you segment it to 15, 20 GRPs? You know, no Madison will pay you the kind of ER for you to be able to fill your coffers.
So then what's the kind of way forward? Because as I see it, the attempt from the content people seems to be to highly differentiate, to target very narrowly, so you deeply engage a few people. But then the advertising revenue that you generate from that would obviously be limited, because you know the audience is limited. And on the other side, sort of we end up with you know, just to give you an idea, when we deal with niche channels, we talk about CPRPs of over ₹1 lakh. When we talk about GECs, we have a CPRP of about 20-25,000, so it's 4 to 5 times higher. Now, why would large clients like, you know, the type of levers or PNGs or Godrej, sort of, would you buy something at 5 times the price if something else is available that is more popular at 1/5 the price? So, whilst I understand that from a viewer perspective, you know, there is a need for differentiation, in my simple head, I'm not able to figure out the economic viability currently in India because of the clear lack of subscription revenue. I mean, some time ago, I think I was told to pay 100 rupees for a channel, and I didn't pay it. I said, oh my God, that seems a hell of a lot, because I'm getting 300 channels for 300 rupees, and then you want 100 rupees for one channel. I said, no, ye rana do. I'm just being frank. I mean, this is how, as a consumer, that was my sort of irrational, instantaneous response. Because it didn't make sense, 300 channels for 300 rupees, and then for one channel, 100 rupees. Mind you, I was a little interested, that's why I must have asked. But then the decision also was rather quick. So what's the way forward then?
So I think, you know, you've answered your own question. The way forward is that you've got to have a certain volume of viewership or whatever. If you want to enter this, so to say, originally produced content segment, you've got to have a certain amount of volume of viewership to be able to make it worth a while, or to be able to make it financially viable. I think there are other segmented spaces like what food has done in the food segment, or you know, some of the other places that have gotten tackled, like Discovery doing stuff which is dubbed in Hindi. Those are spaces that where content costs are limited, your distribution is limited to slightly urban areas and limited areas, that you can make a go with, you know, segmented content. But if you're going to be originally produced 3 hours a day at an average cost of 5-6 hours for every half hour, with a certain amount of distribution cost, a P&L that gets to 300 crores, if nothing else or more, tough. Until you can, like I said, you can deliver to 20-25,000 CPRP at some level. Yeah.
So, I just want to add a couple of things. I think we have to be a little more forward-looking than what has happened in the past, firstly. Secondly, across the world, if you're doing original content television, there are actually 3 legs of revenue, not 2. There's advertising, there's this, subscription, and there's syndication. I think also that, of course, given the size of this country and given the economics, I 100% agree with Tarun that you need to have a certain level of reach and GRPs before you can make the thing affordable. And that's, you know, that's going to be everyone's intent who gets into this space, 100%. And I want to get a differentiation between niche channels and segmented channels and general entertainment channels. So if you look at a scale, if a general entertainment channel is 100, a niche channel would be 1. and a segmented channel would be around 20. I mean, I'm just throwing these figures out randomly, but to give you an idea of scale. And
Segmented doesn't mean niche.
Exactly. And the point that Tarun made earlier was also an interesting point, which he said in a almost soft voice. It's original Hindi entertainment that defines what is segmented and what is niche. Because the cost dynamics of doing original Hindi content requires you to get a certain reach, and requires you to make a certain amount of money through advertising. You know, the other thing is, it wasn't that far away. I've been in media for 10 years, and I remember coming into media and seeing the impact of DTH. I mean, 10 years ago, I was in a distribution meeting where people laughed about DTH and said, you know, India is never going to change. DTH is going to be nobody. I mean, this is going to be an analog market forever. Things change, and they change dramatically. And because we are in it, we don't realize the change is happening. But for someone who steps out every 3-4 years and sees the changes that are happening, you're seeing a tremendous change even with digitization. First, the MSOs and the LCOs are going to start making money. And then it's going to start creeping up to the channel. So subscription is not that far off, as we think. And so the second leg will get stronger. And if you make the right kind of content with limited number of episodes, syndication will also get you revenue. So there is an economic model which has to include advertising by definition in India, but also includes other sources of revenue that makes the whole thing potentially viable.
So today, since you touched on, you know, syndication, do channels in India make what, about 10% through syndication?
I don't think the content in general entertainment channels today lends itself to wider subscription than they do get, because of the nature of what it is. You know, it is long-running soaps with over 1,000 episodes, so they will, and their lifespan is not the same as, you know, if I take HBO's extreme example of Game of Thrones, that has a lifetime syndication value which is very different than, you know, what a soap that's produced. So,
okay, let's go on to another subject. And which has often intrigued me, and that is English versus language. You know, for a long time, India was dominated in advertising by print. And in print, it is English language that dominates at least the advertising market. You know, about as few as 20 English newspapers actually account for 50% of the print advertising market in India. So, as a language, you know, English is the major language, if not of communication, at least for sucking up advertising dollars from the market. But when it comes to television, you know, English is just becoming so inconsequential. You know, whether you take English soaps or whether you take English news. So I've often wondered, you know, why it is so extreme that in print it's as much as 50%, and you know, in English, I don't know what the number is, but it could be as low as 2-3%. Why is that?
So you guys are using English newspapers, and I've been a media planner, so I'll say this, to create influence and not to actually sell products. And you're using Hindi television to actually sell products.
So,
I don't think English newspapers actually sell products to you.
yeah, but then why don't, I mean, I'm asking myself, why don't we use English television to influence, and why doesn't that
You do use English television to influence. If you look at the CPRP that you play on English news channels or English entertainment, it's ridiculously high, and you do use them to create influence. But the fragmentation there doesn't really allow you to create impact and influence together. But a single newspaper in Times of India and Bombay with the front page, jacket can create that much more influence and impact in decision makers than, on 100 spot campaign on NDTV India or NDTV 24/7 or headlines today. That's really it.
I also think that the scale of a media is important. I mean, for television to become economically viable, it needs a certain amount of scale, which is very different from print. And if you go down one level, if you take a look at books and publishing, why is it that only English books sell? It's the same thing. I mean, it's a scale thing. So, in the wider the scale, the more language comes into the fore.
So, I mean, do you think in time to come, English as a medium for television will grow, or?
I don't think so. I think television as a medium may not have English content increasingly because the kind of viewer that watches English television is far moving to NVOD, digital app, second screen and stuff like that. He's not going to sit around watching linear broadcast television. English content will work and will increasingly work and will penetrate bigger and bigger, but I don't think it's going to be in the standard definition television format.
Yeah, I think the second screen is a great phenomenon, and English will move there. I also feel that English is like one of the other languages. So it is a language in India, but it's limited in terms of its reach. And for some reason, and this is something I need to figure out, I don't know the answer, and maybe somebody in the audience does. We like to talk in English, we do many things in English, but we go and see Hindi films or Hindi television. So it's something I haven't figured out. What is it about Hindi entertainment that gets to us more than, so here we are sitting and having nice English conversations, but, the minute a nice Hindi film is released, we rush and see it.
So I'll give you an insight. So I watched this series called Scandal. Scandal Suits, I'm following 3 of them. And How to Get Away with Murder. And I have a fairly upmarket entrepreneur friend who also watches them. So he said, do you have them? So I said, I have an app which I downloaded from, and it's a legal app. So I said, I have the episodes, I can send them to you on a hard disk. So I sent them to him, and he called me back next day. He said, those ones don't have subtitles in it. So I said, yeah, but why do you need subtitles? He said, I miss the accent, and I don't get it most times. So I need the ones with the subtitle, and my wife's not watching it without the subtitles. So why the English we speak and the English we watch is
also very different.
Very, very different, yeah.
So let's go on to another subject, which is, until very recently, you talk of content and you always thought of television. So are you sort of reorchestrating your minds that now when you think of content, you're not just creating this content for television, but you're creating it for any kind of screen? Or is it still television?
No, definitely. I mean, I think when we create content, we create it for multiple screens. We also create it for multiple markets, and we also create it forever. I mean, the thinking that we are trying to do is develop content that has long-term value, where you can continue making money off it even several years later. I mean, some of the greatest brands in the world do that really well, and they have longevity in their content. The value is maintained the same. So, more than screens, I think we should look at content from a longevity standpoint.
Really, I might be crazy when I say this, but we don't really create content for any screen. We create content for audiences. And, for us, the primary starting point for content is insights. And, if an insight works now, it'll work for a long way out. And really, audiences are the center of what we do. And then I think audiences can consume wherever and however they want to. But if they don't connect, and if it's not relevant for them, and if it doesn't work for them, then, so be it.
Okay, let's go to another area, which is formats. I sort of, for one, find it a little intriguing that in spite of all the talent we have, all our capability and skills, we still have to somehow rely on some foreign formats or tried and proven formats, and we seem to buy them at astronomical prices. And when somebody sort of tries to imitate them and do it locally, they don't quite work. I mean, the one example that comes to my mind is Kaun Banega Crorepati. I remember when it first came, Z came out with its own Indian version. I think, yeah, and so, offered 10 crores instead of 1 crore, and it didn't work. I don't know why it didn't work, for what reason. So, what do the content experts have to say about this?
I don't know why Indians have such a problem for adapting formats, or Indian critics or Indian intellectual, groups have a big problem of adapting formats. I believe, and I've done a lot of formats in my life, so I can't really say anything otherwise. I believe that there's a good idea. Don't feel ashamed in copying it, and copy it legally. Do it well, adapt it legally, and do it well. I don't think content ideas have boundaries. They flow very well across the world. If you look at this year's biggest hit movie, it's Bang Bang. It's actually an adaptation of an international Fox movie. So, there's nothing wrong with it if the audience likes it. One. Two, there are two parts of the story of why people adapt formats here. When you want to put in money like 1 crore or 2 crore in an episode, even the management who decides to put that money out there behind it wants to see whether it has legs and it can fly, and it has worked in other parts of the world. Second, advertisers tend to feel far more comfortable when there is a history and a legacy of success within a format. Just to give you an understanding, actually most formats are not American formats. Most people think that we adapt from America, but actually America adapts from Britain. So, or Spain, but whether it's Idol, whether it's Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, whether it's The Weakest Link, whether it's Big Brother, all of these are European, British formats got into America. America, which is the mother of television, or the television industry, or the syndication business, actually, or Ugly Betty. We actually adapted Ugly Betty in India much before America adapted Ugly Betty in the US from a Latin American soap. So there isn't any harm in picking a great idea and getting it out there.
Yeah, I think that there is enough talent out there in the marketplace to create formats if we want to. I think there is no risk appetite, and the investment required and the risk required to create a new format is of a scale different than adapting a format. So it comes back to economics and the risk appetite. As television becomes bigger and as our risk appetite changes, we're going to see a change in that as well. So it's a question of time again, and a question of maturity of a marketplace.
Good. Okay, I think we have about 10 minutes still to go, so let's open this for questions from the house. We have our two experts here, so maybe any questions, thoughts, discussion points, please raise them now. Maybe you can start it off, Anil.
Even a country like Israel is exporting close to $100 billion worth of formats every year. Why haven't we seen that really ballooning in India? We have a lot of young talent out there who can produce formats which can travel. What they need is a first window. Why have the broadcasters been averse to providing that first window? I mean, you've got Armoza formats, which has grown, Keshet formats in Israel. It's not just, and Israel is such a tiny country, we're 1 billion plus people. So why is the broadcast industry so risk averse to giving a chance to Indian formats to grow? Original ideas, not adaptations. Tarun and Mahesh.
Well, I mean, you're asking me that.
You're attempting something different.
But having said that, as I mentioned to you, I think it's a question of, the scale of risk. So if you adapt something and it costs X, and if you try a new format and it costs 10X, and you know that nobody's going to fire you for a decision to take an international format and adapt it here. So it's a question of risk appetite and size, of the market. And I think we're going to get there. The challenge is that if you look at the big networks in India, all of them are profitable, and all of them are quite, well, I wouldn't say they're happy with the status quo, but they like, they've got a model that's working. So why break that model? So it has to be either, a change in there that's going to make them do something different, or a new person who comes in and does something different. There is no other way it's going to change. Right?
I think we're slightly unfair to the broadcast industry. I think one of your sponsors, ZTV, is actually a classic example of how they've never bought formats. I've been in this industry for long enough, and I've always admired what Zee's been able to put together as a content lineup. Whether you see Dance India Dance, whether you see Saregama, whether you see the initial Antakshari, they may not have exported these formats, and I'm not sure. I think they have. We keep reading it in media that they've actually adapted it across many parts of the world. But ZTV has probably at least a innovation and idea or an investment almost every year, every other year around a format, and they've made many successes over the years around these. I think that has now started to percolate down the industry, and many others have started to follow it. And I think what Colors has been able to do with Comedy Nights with Kapil as a sketch comedy format is also very commendable. So I think we are slightly unfair. The last 5 years have seen more indigenous hits than international hits. In fact, the big one, which is KBC, the Millionaire format, is also waning now in India, and largely most broadcasters are starting to do original formats. So, Star Plus has tried India's Raw Star, and Colors has tried Comedy Nights with Kapil, and Z is always trying, they just
I buy that, but we've not managed to institutionalize, and a lot of these formats are coming in-house. They're not coming from young creators.
Yeah.
What happened in John de Mol? If you go back and read the story of John de Mol.
No, I understand, Anil. Yeah. But that's a format of IP ownership in India. So you may not see the sparks who created it, and they don't really become famous. But the fact is, they have come from some young people who created. I worked with a very good maker who Z works very regularly with, and he worked with my company for some years, called Bimal Krishnan. And he's actually been responsible for working with Z on DID and Saregama and all for several years. He's a very bright spark, and there are many others like that who are there, but they may not become John de Mol or own the IP and become who you're talking about, because that's the format of IP ownership. But separate that from whether we're doing indigenous work or not. I think we're doing a fair amount of indigenous work.
I buy that. But my concern is not building the format industry, which can be another revenue stream for the industry.
I think Z, if you look at what they're doing with their syndication and their, across the world beams, they've done a good job in building that business. Yeah. So, Pradeep, correct me if I'm wrong, and take the credit.
Thanks, sir. I think that's fair to also credit the fact that there's a lot of development work that you can see happening. Comedy Nights with Kapil, Z's own ventures over the years to take formats overseas, and it's not stopped there. So there's a lot more thinking on newer things that need to be done. So obviously, the much obvious comes from the really differentiated, but then only time tells whether the really differentiated is able to get the audience to also change at that clip. So format creation, format management, I would say, it's a learning process. I don't think even internationally everybody's really got it under the thumb, and it has to reinvent itself over the years, and that's ongoing task. So as far as IPs are concerned, it's an important piece of everybody's business, right? As a broadcaster, you want to have IPs which you can build and create, and gives you some reassurance that you have something that you can fire when you want. So it's definitely a very critical strategic piece. So it should not be discounted that they do not exist. And some of the channels which want a quick start to get noticed, will use something that's tried and tested. But by and large, those who have the ability to create their own products, to create them. So.
No, I just want to say a couple of things on this. I think there are 3 steps. The first step is to have programming and adapt other formats. The other one is to do program innovation. So what we are seeing in the market today is program innovation, which is great, by the way, and which you're seeing across all channels in terms of the kind of programming they do. But from what I understood of your question, it was, can we take the format of, say, a Comedy Night with Couple and export it to other countries? And that, I think, we are a little early, and to develop that, I think the risk is much higher, because then you have to have distinctive things to it, and if that doesn't work, you've already spent a lot of money. So I feel program innovation and innovation in content is pretty significant in the last 2 years. How much of that will translate into a format is yet to be seen. I suspect it will, because it's a matter of time and the talent is there.
Good morning, my name is Sudeep Mitra, and I want to ask you this question with regard to, you've talked about content. Now, content in television, it seems to be seen that television seems to define or determine what kind of content it should have. Why should a distribution company sit on its judgment of what kind of content it should be? We seem to be, the pattern of discussion seems to be that it has to go via the gates of television and then to someone else. Why can it not be that it is media neutral, content gets created, and the very economics of how the content should be sold can be determined by whichever media wants to go for it first? As we see content today first getting created on YouTube, it is customer generated content which people are seeing first. So that can be possibly be a territory where the channel may not define as to how the content gets created. And in that situation, how do you see the economics working out in the future?
I would love the day when, if somebody funds a program, makes it happen, and then comes to us and says, do you want it or not? I'd love that. But the economics is driven by who's funding the development, the creation of the programming. And that today, the industry tends to be the channels. So if it's done by an independent production house with enough wherewithal and confidence in the content to do it, I think that would be a great day for Indian television.
But you are assuming that it would be always television which would have the lead number of people watching it.
No, I'm not assuming anything. I think
that's not the other screen which will come into the picture.
No, I think it's fair. So content and everything is driven by economics, regardless of what medium it is or what screen it is. So if the production house or whoever the creator or whoever funds it and does a program for whichever screen, then he has the right to decide how it gets distributed and what happens to it. There's no doubt about that.
So my next question is then how do we take the content to the next level? Because as long as you are deciding that this has to be done, I mean, you're keeping the market in the center and content around. In our times, it was the other way around. The content was in the center and the market was around. So what he says is, my gentleman, that in that case, all the time, if something success story is going on, we'll continue to make that. We'll never be able to bring out something different or go to the next step.
Actually, the consumer is at the center, not the market. And I think anybody who's made anything successful in India will agree and accept that nobody's making it for the market or the platform, they're making it for the consumer. And eventually, and let's go back to comedy like Katial, it's a huge hit on YouTube, it's a huge hit on TV, it's a huge hit on mobisodes, it's a huge hit everywhere. So I think if it connects with the consumer, actually platforms start to become irrelevant.
There are producers out there. I was having a conversation with the producer. He said he's willing to fund programming. He's got financiers, but the broadcasters are not agreeing to it. So how does he get out of this dilemma? Because there is money going around in the market to fund producers.
Anil, you must realize the broadcaster, it's not only just about the content and he can fund it and he can put it on air, but the broadcaster is actually putting out a crucial 1 hour, 2 hour of his schedule to be giving to somebody who the broadcaster doesn't think will bring enough consumer insights to the table. If there are consumer insights on that show, I'm sure out of the 5 or 6 broadcasters, somebody will pick it up for sure. So broadcasters are not suicidal. They also want good content, and I think if not 1, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, somebody will be able to see that it's worth its while. And if all 6 can't, then all of us should be in the business.
Asking these questions not because I'm against broadcasters. He's a provocative. So you don't get me wrong.
I think I'm at the end of broadcaster bashing, that's right.
Having said this, in the last 2 years, I've seen a tremendous amount of talent in the marketplace. I've seen a tremendous amount of people wanting to change. And we've also seen an evolution, so we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much in this area. Correct. And the talent is enormous. I think it's a question of evolution and time where things become better.
I mean, think about it, right? All broadcasters have a success ratio of 1%, 2%, 5%, at the max 10%. So they are trying 10 things and one is succeeding, and they're still giving a lot of people an opportunity and a chance out there at their money, at their cost, and at their jobs being on the line to do some stuff. What happens when a show fails? The producer is hurt, and I'm also a producer on the other side, and it does feel bad. But eventually, the broadcaster is also hurt. So everybody loses, but that's just the reality. 1 in 10 shows work, and it's not that people don't want to give people opportunity to do new stuff. It's unfair.
I've seen Satyam Jayate, I've seen efforts like, Everest, Reliance.
Yeah, there are
Totally
enough efforts happening out there on every channel, and there are shows which are not succeeding, right? But somebody comes with that great idea, he thinks it's a great idea, comes to the channel and says, I think it's a great idea. The channel says, yeah, I think it's a great idea. They both put it out together. They put, $1 million in marketing before launching the show. They do everything they have to do. Some things work, some things don't. But it's unfair to say that, broadcasters don't give new ideas or different ideas an opportunity to come and take shape. Everybody tries, everybody's trying every day. Some, get more notice like Everest, and some may not get noticed as what Sukesh has created, Nikki and her cousins or whatever. Yeah, they may not get as noticed, but he's trying something new in a slot that was, predominantly Mahabharata and a different kind of viewers. But everybody's trying something new. And stars give him an opportunity to come back and create a new target audience, a new demographic, and a new show with that. So there is enough innovation happening around the corner. I think we should all give this whole room credit for what they do every single day.
Okay, good. And on that happy note, congratulations everyone for the excellent job you all are doing, and all the very best for your further deliberations during the day. Thank you, Tarun. Thank you, Mahesh.